Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, me too. So to start us off, I want you to just imagine watching the most ruthless, heavily armed superpower on Earth marching straight toward your home.
Right, which is just a terrifying concept.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you know they are coming, you know exactly what they do to the cities they conquer. But then, when you look around at your own government, your own society, you don't even see a unified defense.
No, you just see chaos.
Exactly. You see political corruption, systemic violence, a justice system that is just fundamentally broken, like the rich are openly exploiting the poor, the courts are totally bought and paid for, and the entire social fabric is completely tearing apart.
It's just falling to pieces.
Yeah. And your only weapon, like your only response to this overwhelming, cascading catastrophe, is to go climb a tower, isolate yourself from all the panic, and just demand an answer from the universe.
Which is such a wild response.
Right? It really is.
Yeah.
And so today, we are taking a deep dive into an exclusive exploration of the ancient biblical book of Habakkuk. We're going to try to extract the practical, lived wisdom from this profoundly raw text, because the landscape it describes, it isn't just ancient history.
No, not at all.
It's shockingly relevant to the exact anxieties that you and I navigate today.
It really is. And I think to understand why this text hits so hard, we really have to look at the unique dynamic happening here. Because typically, when you engage with an ancient prophetic text, there is a very rigid top-down structure.
Right, like a guy standing on a mountain.
Exactly. A prophet stands on a mountain or in a city square, points a finger at the masses, and delivers a message from the divine. The communication flows from God to the prophet to the people. It's very directional. It's formal.
Like a megaphone.
Yeah, exactly like a megaphone. But Habakkuk completely inverts that expected dynamic. He doesn't speak to the people on behalf of God. He actually speaks to God on behalf of the people.
Wow, so he's looking at the trauma of his society and initiating this deeply intimate, almost aggressive theological wrestling match.
He is. It's essentially the ultimate crisis of the observer.
So let's talk about that observer crisis. We're talking about roughly 600 BC in Judah. What does that world actually look like on the ground? Because if we're going to understand how this guy feels, we really need to know what he's looking at every single day.
Well, the historical reality of 600 BC Judah is it's grim. You have an internal societal decay that is staggering. King Jehoiakim is on the throne, and the historical records show he is this tyrannical leader, heavily taxing his already impoverished people.
Is to build palaces for himself.
Right. Massive, luxurious palaces for himself while his people starve. And there is literal violence in the streets. The courts are thoroughly corrupt. If you don't have money, you don't get justice. The social contract has entirely dissolved.
So it's rotting from the inside out.
Completely. And then beyond the borders of this internal rot, there is the ultimate geopolitical nightmare. The Assyrian Empire has just fallen, and the Chaldeans, the Babylonians are rising up in their place.
And they were brutal.
Oh, incredibly brutal. They aren't just another nation. They are an insatiable, rapidly expanding military machine, just tearing through the ancient Near East and heading straight for Judah. So Habakkuk is caught in this vice. Internal decay on one side, external annihilation on the other.
Man. And that leads directly into his opening cry, because the very first thing we read in chapter 1 is the psychological toll of witnessing all of this. Actually, his name, Habakkuk, translates to a strong embrace or a wrestling, which is just the perfect descriptor for his mental state.
It really is. The name fits the action perfectly.
Yeah, so in verses 2 through 4, he just unloads. He says, "How long shall I cry, and you will not hear? Why do you show me iniquity?" He describes destruction and violence constantly before him. Strife and contention are rising up everywhere. He's essentially saying, I am looking at perverted justice, and you are doing nothing.
He's desperate for an intervention.
Right. And when you read this, it feels exactly like the modern phenomenon of doom scrolling.
That's a great comparison.
You know what I mean? You wake up, you open your phone, and you are immediately hit with this endless stream of systemic injustice, war, corruption, environmental collapse. You consume it, and it just paralyzes you.
And that paralysis is actually the key mechanism here. The text explicitly says, therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth.
The law is paralyzed. That's a heavy phrase.
It is, because in a healthy society, the law acts as a regulating nervous system. It corrects imbalances, It protects the vulnerable. But Habakkuk is observing a system where the nervous system has just been severed. Yeah, the commentary points out that the divine law, which is the very source of right and order, is chilled or paralyzed because the foundational fire of social love and mutual obligation is totally gone.
So he's bearing the crushing burden of the conscious observer. Like he cares deeply, his moral compass is totally intact, but he is structurally powerless to stop this machine of injustice.
Exactly. And that is a very specific type of psychological agony. It's the cry of the oppressed creature directed straight at the creator.
Right. He's basically screaming, why did you give me a conscience if you're going to force me to watch a world that operates without one?
That's exactly it.
And he demands an answer. But the answer he gets in verse 5, I mean, honestly, if I'm Habakkuk, this is the moment I completely lose my mind.
Oh, for sure. It's not what he wanted to hear.
Not at all. Because God responds, and the answer is absolutely not a comfort. God says, look among the nations, watch and wonder marvelously, for I am working a work in your days which you will not believe, though it is told you.
And what is that unbelievable work? He is raising up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians.
Which is the very nightmare Habakkuk has been dreading.
Exactly. And the text describes the Chaldeans vividly, just to emphasize the sheer terror of this development. They are called a bitter and hasty nation. They march through the breadth of the earth to possess homes that aren't theirs.
Just totally ruthless.
Yeah. And it says their cavalry is swifter than leopards, more ferocious than evening wolves. They gather prisoners of war like sand. They scoff at kings. I mean, fortresses are just a joke to them.
Right. They just build a dirt ramp and walk right over the wall.
Precisely. They just pile up dirt and walk in.
So let's just pause and look at the absolute absurdity of this from a human perspective. Habakkuk goes to the architect of the universe and says, the courts in Judah are corrupt, the rich are stealing from the poor, the system is completely broken.
Right.
And God essentially replies, I hear you, and my solution is to send in the most ruthless, violent, bloodthirsty pagan empire on the planet to burn the whole thing to the ground.
It sounds crazy.
How does that make any sense? I mean, this is a massive philosophical obstacle for the listener. The cure seems infinitely worse than the disease. How can the answer to systemic corruption be literal annihilation by an even worse perpetrator?
Well, that is the core tension of the entire deep dive. It's one of the oldest theological dilemmas in human history, the problem of divine mechanics. Why would a supposedly just universe utilize an even greater, more predatory evil as an instrument of correction?
Right, it feels completely backward.
It does, but our historical and theological sources point out that the Chaldeans represent ultimate, unbridled hubris. The text says their judgment and dignity proceed from themselves.
Meaning they don't answer to anyone.
Exactly. They don't appeal to a higher moral law. They are a law unto themselves. They sweep by like the wind, and they are guilty of a very specific crime. The text says their strength is their God.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They have deified their own military might. They literally worship their own capacity for violence.
Which forces Habakkuk into his second complaint, because he reacts exactly the way any rational, morally grounded person would. Starting in verse 12, he pushes back hard. He appeals directly to God's eternal character.
Which is a bold move.
Very bold. He says, aren't you from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? You are of purer eyes than to behold evil and cannot look on wickedness.
He's calling out the contradiction.
Yeah, he's saying you are pure, so how can you utilize something this toxic? And to illustrate how toxic the Babylonians are, Habakkuk uses this brilliant but honestly chilling metaphor about ancient fishing.
The dragnet metaphor.
Yes, he says the Chaldeans treat human beings like fish in the sea. They just throw a massive dragnet over entire nations, scoop them up indiscriminately, pull them onto the shore to die, and then, and this is the most insane part, they offer sacrifices to their net. They burn incense to their dragnet.
Right, because that net, which represents their military technology, their strategic brilliance, their overwhelming force, is the source of their luxurious life.
It's what gets them everything they want.
Exactly. It is the ultimate manifestation of the idolatry of the self. They don't worship a divine creator. They worship the tools of their own exploitation.
And Habakkuk is looking at this and asking the fundamental question of justice. He says, how can you keep silent when the wicked swallows up the man who is more righteous than he?
Because Judah might be bad, but Babylon is worse.
Right. Yes, Judah is flawed, Judah is corrupt, but Babylon is an entirely different scale of evil. Yeah. Babylon is apex predation. He asks, will he therefore continually empty his net and kill the nations without mercy. Like, are you just going to let this machine of death operate forever?
It's a total crisis of faith, entirely brought on by just observing reality.
Exactly. And honestly, this is where it gets so practical for us. When you see systems failing today, when the proposed solutions look more destructive than the original problems, how do you keep your sanity?
It's incredibly hard.
It is. When you are scrolling through the news and the trajectory of the world seems entirely out of control, what is the actual strategy for survival? Because the brilliance of this text is that Habakkuk doesn't just wallow in the despair.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't throw his hands up, delete his accounts, and hide. He takes a very specific, deliberate action that transitions us right into chapter 2.
He creates a proactive strategy for cognitive and spiritual clarity. In chapter 2, verse 1, Habakkuk declares, "I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will look out to see what he will say to me."
Let's think about the physical reality of a watchtower for a second. If you are down in the streets of a city that's in turmoil, all you have is sensory overload.
Noise everywhere.
Now you have crowds, shouting, rumors, panic, the smell of the market, the claustrophobia of the walls. You have zero perspective.
Yeah.
You can only react to whatever is right in front of your face.
Right. Your horizon is entirely blocked.
Exactly. So to understand the broader landscape, you have to find high ground. You have to climb above the noise. Habakkuk, physically and psychologically, removes himself from the chaotic feedback loop of 600 BC politics.
And the psychological mechanics of this are profound. Commentaries on this passage note that it was the deliberate practice of ancient thinkers to raise their minds above distractions and worldly care to actually hear the divine.
So it's intentional isolation.
Very intentional. Up on that tower, there is wind, there is silence, and there is an unobstructed view of the horizon. He is calibrating his internal state, waiting with the inward ear of his heart, preparing to receive an answer that he cannot manufacture himself.
And the answer does come. The divine speaks again. And the instruction is incredibly practical. God says, write the vision and make it plain on tablets that he who runs may read it.
Make it legible.
Yeah, document this. Make it permanent so that a messenger can run with it and everyone can understand it clearly. But then comes the caveat, and it's the part that goes against every single instinct of our modern on-demand culture.
Oh, absolutely, because it introduces the grueling reality of delayed resolution.
The waiting.
Yes. God says in verse 3, "For the vision is yet for the appointed time. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry."
Wow.
This is arguably the hardest mechanism of human trust. I mean, the human mind demands immediate justice. If a crime is committed, we want the lightning bolt to strike the offender right now.
We want instant karma.
Exactly. But the text introduces the concept of an appointed time. The historical and theological perspective here is that the overarching purpose of the universe operates on a timeline that often feels unbearably slow to the human observer.
It feels like nothing is happening.
Right. It appears to linger, but it is actually moving with precise inevitability. It won't happen when you demand it, but it will happen exactly when it is supposed to.
So the obvious question for anyone listening is, well, how do you survive the waiting? Like, if justice isn't coming tomorrow, how do you live today without becoming completely cynical or terrified?
Which brings us to the absolute core wisdom of the entire deep dive.
Habakkuk 2, verse 4.
Yes, this single verse is the fulcrum of the book, contrasting two fundamentally opposed ways of existing in the world.
Let's break that down.
So it begins with a diagnosis of the oppressor. The text says, "Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright in him." We can call this the swollen soul.
The swollen soul. That paints a picture.
It really does. And the Hebrew linguistics here are fascinating and highly visual. A soul that is swollen with pride, ego, and self-reliance is inherently misshapen. It is crooked.
How so?
Well, think of it through the lens of architectural engineering. If a building's foundation is swollen or bulging on one side, its center of gravity is thrown off.
Right, it's going to lean.
Exactly. It cannot stand perfectly upright. It might look massive and imposing, but structurally it is compromised. It is actively bent away from reality and bent away from the divine order.
I absolutely love that architectural metaphor because it perfectly describes the empires and the toxic leaders of the world. They build these massive, intimidating structures of wealth and power, but because they are entirely self-centered, because they worship their own net like we talked about earlier, they are top-heavy.
That's a great way to put it. Top-heavy.
The collapse is mathematically guaranteed by their own mass.
Exactly. And in direct contrast to the structurally doomed swollen soul, the second half of the verse offers the alternative. It says, "But the just shall live by his faith."
No, we need to exercise some serious discernment with this word faith, right?
Hmm.
Because modern English has somewhat flattened its meaning.
It really has. In ancient Hebrew, the word is emunah. It does not mean a passive intellectual agreement with a set of theological propositions. It's not like taking a test and checking the box that says, I believe God exists.
Right. It's not just cognitive assent. It's not a feeling or a mood.
No, it is bodily, structural steadfastness. It means reliability. It implies an active, unwavering trust that anchors your weight onto something entirely solid.
Like a tree.
Yes. It's the firmness of a deeply rooted tree weathering a storm. The ancient scholars observed that pride estranges the soul, making it falsely self-sufficient, which leads to anxiety because you have to maintain your own universe.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. But emunah, this steadfast cleaving to the divine, allows the righteous person to live a quiet, untroubled life internally, even while the external timeline of justice is delayed. They are fixed to a larger, unshakable reality.
If we translate that into our 21st century reality, this is wildly subversive.
Oh, completely countercultural.
Because we live in a culture that explicitly idolizes the swollen soul. I mean, every message we get tells us to be the self-made architect of our own destiny, the aggressively ambitious conqueror, the hustle culture icon who crushes the competition, who bows to no one, whose dignity proceeds from themselves.
We've put these people on magazine covers.
Exactly. We literally tell people, be your own God, trust only yourself. But this text is warning us that a life built on that kind of swelling ego is an engineering failure. It will inevitably collapse under the stress of reality.
It's structurally unsound.
Right. So choosing to live by emunah, choosing a quiet, steadfast trust, acknowledging that you are not the center of the universe and you do not control the timeline, is the ultimate countercultural rebellion. It shifts your entire center of gravity from your own fragile ego to an unshakable foundation.
And the text immediately proves this engineering failure. It doesn't just leave the swollen soul as an abstract philosophical concept. It moves systematically to show exactly how a life, a corporation, or an empire built on hubris inevitably unravel.
This is where we get the woes, right?
Yes. God dictates a series of 5 woes against the oppressor. And structurally, this is actually a taunting song. It is a dirge. The victims of Babylon are being given the lyrics to sing over the empire that is actively crushing them.
Man, it's a cascading collapse. And we aren't just going to look at these as a numbered list. We're going to see how one toxic trait naturally births the next, creating a chain reaction of destruction.
Let's do it.
It starts with the root mechanism of the swollen soul, which is insatiable accumulation. This is Habakkuk 2, verses 6 through 8. The text declares, "Woe to him who increases that which is not his, and to him that loads himself with thick clay."
Thick clay.
Yeah, thick clay is such an interesting phrase. What does that actually mean practically?
Well, in the ancient Near Eastern context, thick clay was a metaphor for heavy pledges or debts. This is about extortion. It's the hoarding of wealth through coercive economic practices.
So think of it like a hiker deciding to climb a massive mountain. And as he's walking up the trail, every time he sees a heavy, shiny rock that belongs to someone else, he steals it and throws it in his backpack.
He thinks he's getting rich.
Yeah, exactly. He thinks he's accumulating wealth. He thinks he's becoming powerful. But what he's actually doing is loading himself down with thick clay. The further up the mountain he goes, the more exhausted he becomes, until eventually the sheer weight of what he has stolen drives him straight into the dirt.
It's brilliant. The mechanism of extortion is fundamentally a self-inflicted prison. Historical commentaries point out the irony here. The oppressor thinks he is extracting value from his victims, but the universe operates on a law of retaliation.
Right.
The text explicitly asks, "Shall not your debtors rise up suddenly and you will be their victim?" The wealth you extract through exploitation creates enemies. It creates massive instability.
And then you have to deal with that instability.
Yes, and that instability requires you to expend enormous energy just to hold on to what you took. The mechanism of your greed becomes the very weight that drowns you.
So if you've stolen all this heavy clay, if you've extracted all this wealth and created a horde of angry debtors, what is your next logical move? You have to build a fortress to protect it.
Which leads right to the next phase of the collapse.
The illusion of isolation. Verses 9 through 11 address this perfectly. It says, "Woe to him who gets an evil gain for his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil."
And Babylon was infamous for this exact behavior. Historically, the Babylonians engineered their city to be completely impregnable. They built walls that were hundreds of feet high and so wide that chariots could race along the top of them.
That's massive.
It is. They even diverted the Euphrates River to flow under the walls to ensure a permanent water supply during sieges. They built the Hanging Gardens, which were basically artificial mountains in the middle of a flat plain.
So they were literally trying to construct an eagle's nest on high.
Exactly. Attempting to use stolen wealth and engineering brilliance to isolate themselves from the consequences of their own cruelty. They believed if the walls were thick enough, human justice could never reach them.
And honestly, isn't that the exact playbook of the modern swollen soul?
Oh, without a doubt.
When people amass unethical amounts of wealth or power today, their immediate instinct is to build a high nest. They buy the massive estates in gated communities. They build the billionaire bunkers in New Zealand. They fly private to avoid the public.
Right, distancing themselves from society.
The underlying psychology is, if I can just accumulate enough capital, if I can build the physical and legal walls high enough, the pain of the real world cannot touch me. I will be safe from the consequences of how I acquired this money.
But the text shatters that illusion of safety with an incredibly haunting image. It says the stone will cry out of the wall and the beam out of the woodwork will answer it.
Wow. The stone will cry out.
Yeah. The logic here is profound. You cannot build a safe haven out of stolen or blood-soaked materials. The trauma is embedded in the very architecture of the fortress. The inanimate objects themselves, the stones, the wooden beams, are given a voice to testify against the builder.
That is terrifying.
It is. The structural integrity of the house is compromised by the injustice used to build it. You are locked inside a house that is constantly testifying to your guilt.
So the stone crying out of the wall. And if you're going to build walls that massive, if you're going to construct a city of that scale to hide in, you need labor. You need to exploit people on an industrial level.
Which is the next inevitable step.
Right. This toxic chain reaction just keeps going. Verses 12 through 14 attack the futility of this systemic burnout. It says, "Woe to him who builds a town with blood and establishes a city by iniquity."
So this moves from the individual oppressor hiding in a house to the systemic reality of an empire. And whether we are talking about ancient Babylon working conquered people's death to build the Ishtar Gate, or maybe modern toxic corporate cultures burning through young employees to build a tech monopoly, the mechanism is identical.
Is using people as fuel.
Exactly. And the text points out the ultimate futility of this exploitation. It says, "Isn't it from the Lord of armies that the peoples labor for the fire and the nations weary themselves for vanity?"
Labor for the fire.
Yeah. When a system is built on the physical exhaustion and destruction of those at the bottom, when you extract every ounce of life from human beings to hit quarterly numbers or build a monument to an ego, you are forcing people to labor for the fire. You are putting them through immense fatigue to build something that the universe has already designated as combustible.
It's all vanity. Like, you grind thousands of people into dust to build an empire, and time will eventually reduce that empire to dust anyway. It is an empty pursuit.
And Habakkuk provides the contrast to this human vanity in verse 14. Instead of the earth being filled with these bloody cities and monuments to human ego, he says, "The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea."
So the ultimate enduring reality is not human exploitation and architectural hubris. The ultimate reality is the sweeping, inescapable presence of divine justice.
Precisely.
Now, to maintain this kind of brutal, exhausting system, the oppressor can't just rely on physical force.
Right.
They have to break the psychology of the people below them. They have to assert dominance through humiliation.
That's where we get to the fourth woe.
Yeah. This brings us to the darkest mechanism of the swollen soul in verses 15 through 17. The text says, "Woe to him who gives his neighbor drink, pouring your inflaming wine until they are drunk, so that you may gaze at their naked bodies." Now, when I first read this, it just sounds like a warning against a literal, terrible party.
Well, it definitely has literal historical applications. Ancient conquerors would routinely humiliate defeated kings and populations, parading them naked and intoxicated to display their total subjugation.
Right, asserting dominance.
But metaphorically, this is about the psychology of predatory power dynamics. It's about engineering the vulnerability of someone who should be your neighbor.
Engineering vulnerability. I like that phrase.
Yeah, in this context, giving them inflaming wine represents using manipulation, perhaps through flattering words, false promises, debt traps, or literal substances to lower their defenses. The goal is to expose their weaknesses, strip them of their dignity, and gaze upon their humiliation.
So by making the other person small and exposed, the abuser falsely inflates their own sense of dominance and power.
That's exactly it. It is the absolute definition of predatory behavior. You manufacture their ruin for your own gratification.
But just like the stones crying out of the wall, there is an inescapable physics to this kind of moral violation. The universe flips the script. Verse 16 tells the abuser, "You are filled with shame and not glory. You will also drink and be exposed. The cup of the Lord's right hand will come around to you."
It's the mechanism of divine reciprocity. The oppressor used a cup of intoxicating wine to humiliate their neighbor. God responds by handing the oppressor the cup of divine wrath.
Wow, the cup comes around.
It always does. The shame and exposure they forced onto others will be violently doubled upon themselves. The glory they thought they achieved through dominance will instantly curdle into public disgrace. The moral arc is long, but like you said, the cup always comes around.
So we've seen this cascading collapse. Let's trace it. It starts with greedy accumulation, which forces you to build walls of isolation, which requires the systemic burnout of others, which you maintain through psychological humiliation.
It's a complete progression of evil.
It is. But how does an empire or an individual justify all of this to themselves? Because they need an ideology, right? They need a system of belief that blesses their toxic behavior. And that brings us to the final, fatal mechanism, the sheer emptiness of idolatry.
The fifth woe.
Yes, verses 18 through 20 describe the oppressor looking to their own creations for salvation. It says, "What value does the engraved image have? Woe to him who says to the wood, 'Awake,' or to the mute stone, 'Arise.' Shall this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all within it."
This is the ultimate absurd diagnosis of the hubris we've been tracking. The creator trusts in his own creation. I mean, think about it. A human being chops down a tree, carves it into a shape with their own hands, polishes it with precious metals to make it look authoritative, and then bows down to it, asking it to save them.
It's almost comical.
It is. The psychological mechanism here is projection. The idol has no actual power. It only reflects the desires and the ego of the person who made it. They are literally worshiping a mirror.
You want a god who will sanction their violence and greed.
Right, so they build one that can't talk back, can't correct them, and can't judge them.
If we pull that into our modern context, the parallels are staggering. We aren't carving wooden statues to justify our empires, but we absolutely build modern idols. Just look at what we construct with our own hands and minds today.
What comes to mind for you?
Massive technological networks, artificial intelligence, complex financial systems, political ideologies. We build these systems, we overlay them with gold and silver, meaning we give them sleek interfaces and immense capital, and we make them seem omnipotent.
That's so true.
And then we look at our algorithms or our bank accounts, and we say, "Awake, arise, fix our societal anxiety, save us from the mess we've made."
But the diagnosis remains exactly the same. There is no breath at all within it. No matter how sophisticated the technology or how vast the wealth, they are dead things. They cannot generate life, they cannot grant internal peace, and they certainly cannot offer moral salvation.
They're just hollow.
Exactly. There are hollow structures, and when the real storms of history hit, those hollow structures will shatter.
Which sets up one of the most cinematic transitions in ancient literature. Against the backdrop of all this chaotic human noise, the clanking of stolen clay, the crying stones, the cracking whips of labor, the drunken humiliation, the frantic screaming at mute statues, the chapter ends with the drop of a gavel.
Yes. Verse 20.
It says, "But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him."
It is a command to halt the frantic, destructive machinery of human pride. The silence commanded here is not just a cessation of noise. It is the silence of awe, of submission, and of anticipation.
It's heavy.
It is. The commentary emphasizes that this is a recognition of the reality of the divine presence overseeing the entirety of human history. The oppressors think they are running the world, but the true sovereign is seated, unbothered, and observant.
Unbothered. I love that.
Yeah. In the face of that unchangeable justice, the only rational response for the earth is a hushed, absolute stillness, waiting for the judge to finally speak.
And out of that profound pin-drop silence, we move into chapter 3. The silence is broken, but it's not broken by another complaint from Habakkuk. It's not broken by panic. It is broken by a massive emotional musical explosion, a symphony of awe.
Yes, the text introduces chapter 3 as a prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet, set to victorious music, or upon Shigionoth.
Shigionoth?
Yeah, this musical direction, Shigionoth, is incredibly important for understanding the prophet's psychological state. Historical scholars explain that Shigionoth refers to highly emotional, erratic, dithyrambic music.
So this isn't a slow, predictable, metronomic hymn.
Exactly the opposite. The rhythm is wildly variable. The emotional intensity spikes and drops. It mirrors a soul that is trembling under the weight of an overwhelming realization.
It sounds almost chaotic.
It does. The poetic structure of the Hebrew itself shifts rapidly, capturing the passionate, almost chaotic joy and fear of encountering the raw majesty of God.
I imagine it like a massive orchestral film score where the strings are playing frantically, the percussion is booming like thunder, and then the bottom just drops out into a single haunting woodwind note.
That's a perfect auditory image.
Because Habakkuk has just heard the woes. He knows exactly how evil the swollen soul of Babylon is, and he knows that God's plan is still to let them invade. The doom is real. The Chaldeans are still saddling their horses.
The threat hasn't vanished.
Exactly. But instead of spiraling back into the doom-scrolling despair of chapter 1, he utilizes a powerful cognitive and spiritual tool. He begins his prayer by saying, "Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. In wrath you remember mercy."
He accepts that the judgment is coming.
Yes, but to survive the terror of the future, he anchors his mind entirely in the past.
And the mechanism of cognitive reframing here is brilliant. In verses 3 through 15, Habakkuk unleashes this torrent of visual poetry recounting the historical interventions of God. He talks about God coming from Timon, from Mount Paran.
What do those locations signify?
Well, to the ancient Israelite mind, these locations immediately trigger the memory of the Exodus. It recalls the wandering in the wilderness and the giving of the law at Mount Sinai. He says his splendor is like the sunrise. Rays shine from his hand. The ancient mountains were crumbled. He describes the sea being trampled and the rivers being split apart.
Okay, so think about why he's doing this. When you are facing a massive, seemingly insurmountable crisis in your own life, let's say you lose your career, or you get a terrifying medical diagnosis, or a relationship shatters, the future suddenly looks like a black, terrifying wall.
It's completely opaque.
Exactly. And if you stare at the future, the anxiety will break you. So how do you survive that panic? You look at your track record, you look back at your life and realize, hey, I've survived 100% of my worst days.
Right.
You remember the times you were absolutely certain you were going to break, when you had no money, no hope, and no path forward. But somehow, provision arrived, strength materialized, the sea split. When the future is dark, you ground your sanity in the proven faithfulness of the past.
And that is the active practice of emunah, that steadfast faith we discussed earlier. Habakkuk is not merely reciting a history lesson. He is actively reminding his nervous system of who is actually in charge.
Calming the physical panic.
Yes. The commentators note that Habakkuk exhibits the future in pictures of the past. The logic is impenetrable, really. If the divine could shatter the Egyptian empire, split the Red Sea, and bring a nation of runaway slaves through a barren wilderness, then the divine is entirely capable of preserving his people through the coming darkness of the Babylonian invasion. The past guarantees the future.
Which brings us to the ultimate test of that faith, the absolute pinnacle of this deep dive, and honestly, arguably one of the most profound statements of resilience in all of ancient literature. Habakkuk 3, verses 17 and 18.
It's an incredible passage. The prophet writes, "For even though the fig tree doesn't flourish, nor fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive fails, the fields yield no food, the flocks are cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation."
It is so easy for a modern listener to gloss over that list. We hear no figs or no fruit on the vine, and we think, oh, that's a bummer. They ran out of wine and dessert. We just don't feel the weight of it.
No, we don't. To feel the weight, we really have to deeply understand the ancient agrarian economy of the Mediterranean. This list is a sequential description of total, unmitigated socioeconomic annihilation.
Break that down for us.
Well, the fig tree and the vine weren't just luxuries. They were vital sources of calories and the primary symbols of peace and stability. The olive tree was the backbone of their entire survival. It provided food, it provided the oil used to light their lamps so they wouldn't be in darkness, and it was their primary medicine.
It was everything.
It was. Furthermore, an olive tree takes years, sometimes decades, to mature and produce. If the labor of the olive fails or the trees are cut down by an invading army, you aren't just losing a season's crop, you are losing generational wealth.
Oh, wow. So it's a compounding catastrophe. And he goes on, the fields yield no food. That means literal famine, starvation. The flocks are cut off from the fold, and there is no herd in the stalls. That is the complete loss of their economy, their clothing, their currency, and even their ability to offer religious sacrifices.
It's the end of everything they know.
Yeah, to translate this into modern terms, this is the stock market crashing to absolute zero, the banks locking their doors, the grocery store shelves completely bare, the power grid going offline, your 401k vanishing into thin air, and your house burning to the ground all on the exact same day.
That's exactly the scale of what he's describing.
It is the stripping away of every single conceivable layer of physical, financial, and agricultural security. Total ruin.
And yet, facing the absolute certainty of this material annihilation, Habakkuk's response defies all human logic. He says, "Yet I will rejoice in the Lord."
It's almost unbelievable.
It is. This is the manifestation of the core wisdom of the text. Habakkuk achieves the ultimate spiritual and psychological victory. He successfully detaches his joy, his peace, and his identity from his external circumstances, and he anchors them solely in the unchangeable nature of the divine.
So he's not relying on his environment anymore.
Right. The commentary distills this into a brilliant insight. Habakkuk has learned to rejoice in the giver, even when all the gifts have been violently stripped away.
That is incredibly heavy. And honestly, it leads to the most practical, piercing reflection we can take from this entire text. When you look at your own life, ask yourself honestly, what is your personal fig tree?
What a question.
Right. What is the thing that, if you lost it tomorrow, would completely destroy your sense of peace and identity? Is it your career trajectory? Is it your investment portfolio? Is it your reputation or a specific relationship or even your physical health?
It's tough to think about.
It is. Because if your internal joy is tied exclusively to the fig tree flourishing, if your peace depends entirely on the stock market going up and everyone liking you, then you are incredibly fragile. You are always going to be at the mercy of the wind. A bad quarter, a sudden illness, or an economic downturn will devastate you because your foundation is entirely conditional.
But if your foundation is the emuna we discussed, a steadfast trust anchored in the unchangeable reality of the Creator, you become structurally sound. You become largely untouchable by the chaos of circumstances.
And that realization leads to the magnificent final verse of the book. Verse 19 describes the physical result of this internal transformation. It says, God, the Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like deer's feet and enables me to go in high places.
Such a beautiful image. Habakkuk is acknowledging that the invasion is coming. The valley is going to be filled with violence and chaos. But he isn't asking God to flatten the mountain so he doesn't have to climb it.
Right. He's not asking for an easy path out.
No, he is saying that God gives him the precise, sure-footed agility of a mountain deer to navigate the treacherous, terrifying crags of the rocks. The steep and slippery places become safe pathways for the person whose strength is sourced internally rather than externally.
So he doesn't avoid the danger. He transcends it. He's given the ability to scale the sheer cliff face without slipping. Which leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative thought to sit with as we wrap up today.
Okay, what is it?
Just look at the massive psychological journey Habakkuk takes over the course of these 3 short chapters. In chapter 1, he is the ultimate victim of his circumstances. He is doom-scrolling, paralyzed by anxiety, screaming at the sky, furious that the world is broken and unfair.
Completely overwhelmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
But by the end of chapter 3, he is standing on a mountain peak, sure-footed, resilient, and radiating an indestructible joy. He's moved from complete despair to transcendent peace. And here's the absolute kicker. Not a single detail of his external reality changed.
Not one.
The Babylonians are still marching toward Jerusalem. The violence is still going to happen. The economy is still going to completely collapse. God did not grant him a miracle to stop the invasion. The external storm is raging at the exact same ferocity in chapter 3 as it was in chapter 1.
But Habakkuk changed.
Exactly. Habakkuk changed. His perspective shifted. He stopped looking at the thick clay of greed. He stopped staring at the corrupt systems and the mute stone idols, and he fixed his gaze on the sovereign reality above it all. His external world remained a chaotic storm, but his internal world became an impregnable, unshakable fortress.
What an incredible conclusion to his journey.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.